family-owned business disputes or disputes in family-owned businesses and mediation. So thank you very much, but I'm going to put you on the spot. I said, you are going to tell us about the conference first. I want to, because I like to hear other people tell me about the conference. It tells me, well, first of all, what good things are happening, or maybe some other critical aspect also. Please.
Well, what could be bad about a conference that starts with Ken Cloke? I mean, right away, it's a very high standard. And from the ones that I've watched, including most recently, I saw, who was it?
Michael Lang?
Michael Lang, yeah, of course. And also right before that, I think
Bernie Mayer.
Bernie Mayer. Yeah, I'm sorry. You did put me on the spot. I wasn't thinking about it. Yeah, and they were just really, really good. And so I like the free form of it. I like the fact that everyone is open to, it's not a question and answer format, although I certainly take questions, but it's really a very easy format to do. And I really enjoy it, and I think all the other people have enjoyed it too.
Perfect. So that's been the idea of all the shows and events that I do. That it's just a conversation, because that's what we do, don't we? Just we have conversations. So might as well do everything that you do in the same format. So of course, 18th May to 30th June, I have to put this across. I'll tell you later why I want to talk about it, because earlier I used to start into the session straight away. But there was a session on neurodiversity and mediation. So someone who was autistic who was on that. And she said, look, we want to know what's happening. We want to be prepared as to what we're getting here. So I started introducing the conference. So please, all the recordings available, mediatorvikram.com. You'll find the link to the YouTube channel. Otherwise, search for Mediator Vikram. You'll find that. So, Richard, thank you very much. Of course, you're going to have to tell us about yourself, and then we'll move into the topic.
Okay, well, thank you again for inviting me. I was trained as a lawyer. I worked as a corporate lawyer for many years, and I was introduced to mediation while I'm working as a commercial lawyer. And I saw how my clients, mostly European clients, were absolutely delighted in the whole process, because they had all heard how horrible it was to be involved in US litigation, and they would do anything not to be. And this was a way out for them. And it was actually, as I know now, and I learned to know then, it does reach a solution which is really better than the solution that was either or of litigation. And so anyway, so I then got interested in it. I started doing neighborhood mediation. I was trained as a local neighborhood mediator. And I did many, many of those, from landlord-tenant to neighbor disputes about parking to dog barking, all the things that are in daily life, such problems. And there was, before this institution started, there really was no way for them to do anything about it. They go to the police, and the policeman would come and say, keep your dog quiet. And there wasn't any real way to enforce these things, or, I mean, it wasn't, as we know, in mediation. So when that started, I'm surprised how many people were aware of it, because we had a full evening. We had 2 or 3, I mean, there were several mediators at the same place. It was in the CMS, a mediation center in Queens, New York. And we had a full boat of people who needed mediation. And so it was a great training for me. And I think the issues I faced then are no different than the issues I faced as a commercial mediator. There's always personalities involved, emotions involved. There really isn't a mediation. Steve Hoffman likes to say, he's a mediator and trainer in New York, that the percentage of commercial mediations that have emotion involved with it is, give or take, 100%. So it's true. It's different levels of emotion, but it's there. And it could be in that it's internally in the company, you don't even know it, that the person who is representing the company feels he made a mistake and he wants to somehow recover by the mediation. But anyway, there's always a feeling of threat, of people going to the amygdala to try to defend themselves. And our job is to smooth them out of that, whether it's a community mediation or commercial mediation or family business, to move them out of it. Anyway, so then I started doing more commercial mediation, which I was paid for, believe it or not. I mean, that's the thing which is always surprising, that people, I do what I love to do and people give me money for it. That's really nice. And then I went to it was either an ABA dispute resolution section or ACR, Association for Conflict Resolution annual meeting, where there was a section on family business disputes. And a good friend of mine who has since become, close to me, he's on my committee, Jack, he's been involved in FFI for many, many years. FFI is the Family Firm Institute, which is what I eventually got trained in. And what was described was a way of dealing with problems within a family that was less than litigation, which can be very destructive to a family to litigate. I mean, even more so than commercial relationships. And yet they had problems which needed to be addressed. So it was really perfect for that. And I got into it. I got trained as a family firm mediator. And I've done many since then, also doing commercial on the way, because there aren't that many family firm mediations. There are probably many that need to be done, but to get that many people to agree on something is difficult. There usually is a larger family involved. So now I speak about it. I've given workshops on it. I've talked to lawyers, to business people about why mediation can help them in their business. And so that's what I would like to talk about today.
Perfect. I think the important thing, like be it neighborhood disputes or whatever, there are people involved, and people are going to be people, whatever be the situation, and sometimes whatever be the stake, the people are going to be people. And I think that, and the main thing is that whatever people that you have in communities or in neighborhoods are the people who are going to be running businesses or working in places. So it's just the same people. They don't change in the way they look at things. So I think that's why it's important, wherever you are, look at them from that perspective, which is what we were talking about with Bernie Mayer about the human touch. So that human touch, I think, is required everywhere, wherever it might be. But in terms of the family businesses, do you see something different there? I mean, do you see their approach different to the disputes? Obviously, you can talk about the range of disputes also, but all the things.
No, I as you said, at the heart are human beings who have problems with another human being or a system, and they don't know how to deal with it. And so they react either with anger or with or not saying anything and just passively let it go by, but then it builds up inside them. So the thing about a family, which I will intend to talk about in more detail, is that it goes on. I mean, it's not just after the mediation you go home and you never see the person again. It's likely that you will and your children will see that family, the person who you saw at mediation, or again. And it's very difficult to, as I mentioned earlier, to go through a litigation and keep a family together. The stresses that are caused by litigation on a family are so great. I did one where there were 3 sisters involved. They had been fighting over land, which was in the family. They hadn't talked to each other without a lawyer present for 3 or 4 years. I mean, these are 3 sisters, and it's destructive. And of course, their children did not know, or they knew, but they didn't associate with the children of the other relative. So it is something which is very important, I think, for families, so they can move beyond it in a way which is, there's always going to be hard feelings, but I think through particularly some, if you can do a transformative type mediation, even if you don't call it that, if you get the feeling that they understand one another, there can be real growth and reuniting after the mediation. So yes, it is good for families.
Because in a way, what you're doing is it's a combination of family mediation and commercial mediation put together. So I think the dynamics of that will be interesting.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the context is commercial because that's what the litigation deals with. They don't deal with, we don't go to feelings court. We go to a court dealing with rights and remedies and things like that. So it's always in that context. But that's where it stops as far as the mediation goes. And we don't pound the table on rights and remedies in mediation. So as you know, so yeah, no, I'd like to go through a couple of points. So there's a certain logical order I prepared for this, and
Please.
it would be helpful for me not to keep repeating myself, which I will do if I don't follow it. The first question is, what is the significance of family-owned businesses? And in fact, probably the largest proportion of the economy of businesses in the United States are family-owned. It may be true in India as well. So I know it's true in Germany and other countries that they are the backbone of commerce is family-owned. And also because many of them, at least in the United States, were formed by people who were born in the 1945 era, right after the World War II. They are starting to retire and they're starting to move on. And if they've built businesses, they're ready to sell, or is what I get involved, they're ready to pass it on to a family member. And that's when the disputes arise. If they're selling it to a third party and they're the owner, there's nothing for me to do. It's a commercial transaction. They get as much money as they can. How they split up the money is not as hard as splitting up a business. But that means that right now, I think there are probably a lot of pending disputes which just need to be addressed. And most lawyers really aren't trained to deal with the issues, nor because of the ethical restrictions on a lawyer, he cannot talk to the other side as a mediator can out of the presence of the other lawyers or the other parties. It's people often confuse, as you know, arbitration and mediation, but the biggest single difference, other than the fact that we don't decide anything, is that we can talk to people privately and get their side of the story privately. And that is really very important. So the question, what is a family held business? Now, we all know there's grocery stores around the block who are owned by a family. Now and in fact, I've been involved in some of the disputes involving those. But there are also small businesses that are owned by childhood friends. They've been friends since childhood. They formed a business together. Maybe they went to college together. And now they're no longer able to deal with each other. So I consider that a family business dispute because their families know each other, their children know each other, their wives know each other. And so it's very similar to a family. So for as far as I'm concerned, that's a family business dispute. Then there are the small business ones, which really are all family, which are like automobile dealerships or dental or law practices sometimes. I did a mediation last year involving the two partners of one law firm, very successful law firm in a particular area of law. And the father had started the law firm and then passed away, and his two children, a man and a woman, they were siblings, he gave 50% of the firm to. Now, time passes, and it's now probably 10 years later. The son is bringing in a lot of business. The daughter is also very good, but she's more of a backroom type of lawyer. And he's getting upset because 50% of the business is going to her and 50% to him. So, and she says, well, that's what father wanted. That's the way he set it up. So that actually had been brought to a court, and it was sent to me by the court to mediate. Well, that was a law practice. Of all the places you would expect people to think about mediation, the court had to drive them there. And I've also done dental practices and medical practices. So very often with medical practices in the United States, they have so lawyered or documented up their a partnership done by fancy law firms. So we'll have 30 pages of fine print as to what happens when you leave and so on. And yet it never applies exactly. And there are always fights about what the value is, what they brought to it, how much they should be owed because they left early. I mean, all of these things are still issues. So even if it's very much, as I said, documented as to what happens, there's still issues, and those can be mediated. And then, of course, the biggest example I know of a successful middle-sized company where actually I was involved in the mediation of one. It was in Germany, and that's the whole, what they call the Mittelstand. Mittelstand means essentially mid-sized companies, and Germany is loaded with them. I mean, I would say 80% of the business in Germany is Mittelstand, and they're now it's maybe 3 generations at least, maybe even more. One company I dealt with was formed in 1890 and had a succession of the oldest sons of each family taking over. And so that's an area where there are mid-sized businesses. And then the last ones I just mentioned, but I don't really deal with them because they're public corporations or almost public. And those are the large family corporations. New York Times is one. They're public in the sense that there is some stock owned by the public, but it's controlled by the family. Walmart's another one. Walmart's one of the largest companies in the world. Ford, Cargill is, I think, the highest revenues of any privately held company. And most people don't even know what it is. It deals with agricultural chemicals and agriculture and things like that. And Henkel, which is a big German company, that has they have a separate organization just for the shareholders of Henkel, who are all related, and there might be now 100 of them. And so those are a series of problems which I'm familiar with, but we're not going to be talking about today. That's setting up the family councils and things like that. They're very important in companies like that, but not that important if you have 4 or 5 owners. Now, what's a family business dispute? I consider any dispute among the related, and it does not always technically related, but related owners of a company as to a major business decision. I mean, every business is going to have disputes because that's everyday life is full of disputes and they resolve them. But these are the major disputes, and that includes assets. This is not a business, but it turns out to be like a business when you have a will and property is given to children to be owned jointly. It could be agricultural land, it could be apartment buildings. It's a business, but it was more as an investment into real estate. But that still will have its issues and family intertwined. There are also disputes vertically between the parent and the child. I've been mediating one case involving a father who is in charge of the company and his son, who is now in his 50s, who wants to take over, and the father just can't let go. And so he says he wants to let go, but he never does. And the son is frustrated, and that's parent-child. The Also siblings, of course. That's the second generation is what I mentioned, is really where you have a hotbed of litigation or disputes where the children against one another are trying to either take over the company or in some way get rights that they think they deserve. And another area which is very interesting is vacation homes. And I've been involved in a couple of those, and I have a friend who does a lot more. And in the States, like an area like Cape Cod, has many beautiful homes that were built in the 40s and 50s. And now the parents and grandparents have moved on, but they're probably anywhere from 5 to 35 children and grandchildren who have the right to use that summer house. Now, just saying it, there are disputes, just saying that word. But then the issues come up, not just dividing up the time, but what happens when the roof needs to be replaced? It costs $200,000. And one of the children is a teacher and one is an investment banker. And so dealing with those issues is family business, or family, again, not a business, but it's run like a business. And now with Airbnb, it's probably business too. So that's there. Now, what are typical disputes? Okay, now one is a deadlock. That means essentially that something cannot be done without the consent of one or more of the parties. For instance, decisions at the board level, at the shareholder level, normally require majority. I mean, some require more, but majority is almost always the case. So if you don't have any one or two shareholders who control the majority, that means they have to get the agreement of at least one or two others to get over the 50% hurdle. And in some cases, it's even higher. To approve a sale of a company, you need in some states 75 or 80% of the approval before you can take that action. So those are the kinds of decisions that come up. Lowering dividends because maybe the son who runs the company wants to expand because it's a growing business, but it will mean that they cannot pay dividends for 3 or 4 years. Now, some of the siblings may live on those dividends. So that's another big issue, how to do that. I mean, the company really needs to grow. It's maybe a very good company, but without their approval, you can't do it. A CEO and other elections after the death of the founder are also major areas of dispute. Plus hiring and firing of family members. That's something that as children get into the age of wanting to be on their own, they see this big golden goose out there. If they could become part of that company, they can get into the family, but it could be they're not qualified or they don't need them. So why should one son have his son work in there and the daughter not have her son work? I mean, you can imagine the problems, and we see them every day. So those are the kinds of problems that would never arise if there weren't a family involved. You couldn't go to your boss and say, I don't think it's fair. He'd say, I don't care. That's really part of the business. So dealing with that are issues of families. Now, the question is, how does an ordinary family business, or how does a family business mediation differ from a ordinary mediation? Let's just call it. There is no ordinary mediation, but you know what I mean. There are normally more preliminary meetings with the stakeholders, and although I try to do that in every mediation I can, unless it's impossible because of time or geography. I will really insist that I meet with everyone. I don't want anyone entering into a joint meeting not knowing me, because if they don't know me, they'll think I'm in the pocket of somebody else. And I need to get that trust going. The ostensible reason, and it's true, is to learn more information. But the really important reason is to build trust, because that's what my practice is built on. It won't work without that. I sometimes, and a friend of mine does it all the time in family business, he prepares a summary of issues based on his discussions with each of the family members. And so at the first meeting, he will go through what the issues were without attribution as to who said what or so on, just kind of like you heard this could be a problem. I have two thoughts about that. One is that in some cases, it's probably a good idea. In other cases, if they really don't want anything attributed to them, one of the partners or the family owners, it's hard to prevent that because it could be only one person or two people that are really interested in that issue or whatever. I think it probably is likely to cause a problem. Now, the main reason why I don't use it often is that if I come in with a summary of points, that's the way the discussion will go. It will be limited to those points. Now, until there's the excitement and the energy of a meeting, you don't really know what the real issues are. And so I'm kind of jumping over that step of letting them kind of build the agenda if I start with the agenda. So I see a good reason for it sometimes, but I think it's likely to leave out things which are important. Another difference between mediations, ordinary, let's call them, and ordinary commercial mediations of business and family, is that the issue which you're dealing with is usually the tip of the iceberg. It's really other issues which have been going on for a long time that are the issues. And the issue may be who's to be elected president and so on. But that wouldn't be an issue if they didn't have these underlying issues. And I would say in most commercial mediations, the lawyers, if they're there, they do not want me to spend time delving into those issues. I mean, not because they don't care, but they think it's irrelevant. Now, I don't think it's irrelevant, but I cannot be the only one in the room who thinks it's relevant. I can talk about it, but I can't always win. But in a family, they're definitely relevant. Another difference is it may go on for months. I mean, we may have one session a week for 5 months, whereas in a commercial mediation, normally it's 1 or 2 days. I think with Zoom, I've been able to extend it more than 1 day so that people don't sit around at midnight trying to make a decision. We have 3 hours and then we set up another meeting, because if all you have to do is go to your living room and turn on your computer rather than drive somewhere, it's much easier. So they're not averse to having a second meeting that way. It's a different subject, but dealing with Zoom meetings, sometimes lawyers will say, well, the client's in the room with me, and I'll be looking at the lawyer. And I'll say, well, that's not good. I want the client in the picture. So they'll move the things, like the furniture around, and get the client and the lawyer together. I prefer the client to have his own screen, but that's a wholly different issue than today. And I think I said as each party should feel like they chose me. I don't want anyone feeling I was chosen by the owner or the father or the senior brother or whoever. Everybody should feel like I'm trustworthy to them. Now, just the headlines of some recent family business mediations I've done. I mentioned one was the 3 sisters in the commercial property. There were 3 brothers involving who would be the CEO of the machine tool company. Eventually, one of them left to form his own company. A brother-sister, which was the law firm I mentioned. Cousins in a wholesale food market. Father and son in an industrial company as to a succession. Convenience store, where they were childhood friends. I mentioned that one too, they were very close, but now they reached the point where they each own 50%, and one would work the convenience store from 6 a.m. to maybe 3 p.m., the other one from 3 p.m. to midnight, they would not talk to each other. They would have separate cash registers. They would have everything. It would be like as if the other one did not exist. And as you can imagine, how do you order anything? How do you pay the electrical bill? How do you do all those things? So it was a total mess. And actually, the way I resolved that, because they would hardly talk to each other in mediation, I insisted that they bring their wives with them. And the wives actually settled the mediation because I know from personal experience that it's hard for someone to take less than what he told his wife he was going to get that morning when he went to the mediation. If she's there, she can understand the whole issue and actually be, and not as emotionally attached to it. So I often have wives attend, whether they're family or not, but certainly in family. Another one, a specialty friends, or a specialty bakery, they were making a product that was being sold around the city, in New York City, and very popular. And one of them wanted to expand the business tremendously, go to other cities and so on. And the other one didn't. And the business could not move on until one arranged a buyout. And that's what I helped them do. Now, in the sessions itself, you'd think, what difference show up right away from what I see happening in an ordinary mediation and in a family mediation? The very first thing I hear, not very first, but certainly one of the first, is the word fairness. It's not fair what he's getting and I'm getting. It's not fair. I rarely hear fairness in the commercial mediation because everybody knows that's not in the law books anywhere, fairness. But in families, fairness is very important. And is it the perception of fairness? And so one of the first things I do is I discuss what each one's idea of fairness means. And they can be very different. I mean, there could be a feeling of everybody gets equally. Why not? There's a certain simplicity and beauty to that. I agree. But another one may say, well, that's not what Dad wanted. He knew my daughter was ill and she would need care for the rest of her life. And therefore, we need more money. And it would be fair. Then we would be treated fairly. And so on. So each one had their own idea of fairness. But once they talked about it, they could understand where the other person was coming from. They understood their own problems. And eventually the solution may not have been exactly what either one wanted, but it took into account the other side. So the word fairness, I think if there's any one word that distinguishes businesses from family business, from regular business mediations, it's fairness. There's what we're dealing here with are two systems, the family system and the business system. And if I could share the screen for a minute, I'll show you a three-circle memo. Am I set up for sharing now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Not yet. No.
No, I can see it. I've got to put it on share screen though. Let me see. I'll put it down again.
You just have to press the share screen. That's all that's required.
I don't see it. Anyway, I think it's probably, as most things like this, the time taken for me to make it work is not worth the time to do it. So,
It should be simple. Should be simple. Just if you press the share screen, I think because you've got the permission to do it, so you can.
Actually, but now I'm no longer in the main screen, so I've got to find.
Okay.
I gotta get back into the main screen, which is somewhere. It's kind of disappeared off my screen. There we are. Okay, let me try share screen now.
Yeah.
It's behind the share screen, but it's not on the screen. I'm afraid if I move this, can you see that?
No, but you haven't pressed the share screen, I think. Have you pressed the share screen button?
Press share screen. I've got the
You've got the,
board.
no, you'll
The
have to just
board.
click on that. Yeah, just click on that and then press share on the right side corner on the window there. Once you click the window, yes, that's it. Yeah, we're on.
You can see this now.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah. If you can make it a little bigger, is it an option?
a little bigger.
You can expand it a little
I
bit.
don't know quite how to
Oh,
do
it's
that.
okay. It's okay. It's okay. That's okay. If you can see it.
It's so simple. It's almost ridiculous.
No, it's okay. Sometimes these things are important to get the message through.
I mean, the family business ownership, and you can see all the issues which I deal with are in this little part right here. Almost all of them. That's when the family, the business, and the ownership come together in some way. Here are people that own the business but are not part of the family. Here they're part of the family but not part of the business. And here they're employees of the business, let's say, but they're not part of the family, that ownership. But here is really, I mean, sometimes over here. So this, believe it or not, this was devised by Harvard Business School and is used all the time to teach it. It seems so intuitive that you would think, why bother? But in fact, it does help see where the issues are. So let me now take it off and we go back to stop. I'll stop share.
I'll stop. I'll stop the share. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for helping me walk through that.
Because
So-
we are going to discuss that, because it's a very interesting diagram, only because of the fact that bringing in others into the picture, into the mediation, is also important. And out of that, there are so many other people who are interested in some way, and the mediator would maybe want them to be part of it somewhere. I don't know how you look
Well,
at it.
I meant to say that while it was up there. The whole family, which is not technically part of the business, they're very often very influential in the business. You know, the grandmother or the mother whose husband ran the business years ago, she is a matriarch and she may have a lot to say. And if she says, I don't want you closing down the original store because it means so much, they won't do it. I mean, she has no rights, but it's like, yeah, that's the employees have rights simply or have power. Let's call it power, not rights, because they can be very important to the business. It's hard to find good employees. And so if they want, for instance, I set up a what's called a phantom stock plan for a family-owned business last year. A phantom stock plan sounds very cool, but what it is you have a baseline when you join the plan, which is let's say it's the formula based on the sales of the company. And then when you leave or retire, about 10 or 20 years later, they use the same formula and decide what it's worth. And you get the difference as a payout, which would be theoretically something like owning stock in the company. But it doesn't, they have no voting rights, they have no rights of anything other than to get that money back or get the growth in the company. So that's a case where you have employees who have power and not rights. So as I said, traditionally the mother is, again, this is old fashioned, and I'm sure that people would say it's not this way anymore, but I think it still is. The mother is in charge of the well-being of the children and their relationship with each other and the extended family. The father's involved, but if there's someone who's in charge of that, it's usually the wife. There was a New Yorker cartoon a few years ago, which the wife is talking to the husband in the living room and saying, Junior's getting a promotion this year, right? Now, the father obviously runs the business. Junior may be a complete idiot, but now he's got this conflict of dealing with his wife, and she's has no power in the business, but she has power over him. And so that's the kind of thing which is endemic to family business. The other matriarch problem I often see is that they do not want to see disputes among the children as long as they're alive. So they said, no, we're going to keep going just the way things are. We're not going to change anything. That's the way your father wanted it, and so on. Meantime, and her reason is she wants peace in the family. Well, to buy that peace, she's sacrificing the future, because as soon as she's gone, then all of the hidden um, tensions break out between the children about why this person's treasurer. He doesn't know a thing about money, so on. But so that's another case of an influencer who has no right per se, but has a influence and power over the business. One point, this is not exactly on point, but I thought it was really interesting, is a research done. I read a study of this that professional like researchers were watching children playing that were family children in the backyard. I mean, not just once, but many, many, many times. And they saw the children's fights, which are what we would call disputes, are resolved by one of two ways. One is that the parent or somebody like the parent intervenes, boom, it's settled. Or the other way is the larger or bigger one wins. That's almost the rule, that you don't have other ones. I mean, there could be some teenagers may have different rules, but certainly it's small children. That's the way they do it. And so why should we think that when they get to be in the board 30 years later, that they're going to act any differently? They probably are not. They're still reacting to the other sibling. And they may not even know it, but they are. And the things that a good friend of mine, Natalie McVeigh, who is very well known as a family business mediator, she came up with a list of things, which I've seen quite often in families, which make it the kind of things which are hidden, but which are greatly influence what happens. And I won't give you much detail on them, but they're bullying, for instance. The bullying of one over by others is, maybe it started as a youngster and it's still going on. Gender roles, sometimes the women's opinion are not taken seriously, even though they are equal in ownership. Scapegoating, saying all the problems are all due to him because he, whatever it was, or he's one, they find a person to blame. Substance abuse and addictions, often not taken seriously, but nobody talks about them. Somebody drinks a lot and embarrasses himself in the office. People just tolerate it. Birth order, the oldest having traditionally more rights and power than the others. Well, there's no legal or practical reason why the youngest one, who's a whiz at business, shouldn't be able to run the business. But the family order really doesn't allow it, because the oldest one is the one who considers himself the heir apparent. And that can be discussed. I mean, these things are not necessarily pretty, these discussions, but they are important. Sibling rivalry, many reasons for that. Lesbian and gay issues, I mean, they're talked about now a lot more than they used to be, but you could see how in many families, the gay sister would be treated like a pariah in the family. Adoption. A child, one of the 5 children is adopted, maybe even a different race. And that is also, it may depend on what age it was adopted. Maybe the others were already teenagers and they adopted this young child from a different country. You can imagine that even though there's a great bond between them, there are issues which that one feels that he would like to talk about it, and maybe he needs to. Income disparity, we talked about that a little bit, where one child is not earning as much as another and therefore feels he should get more out of the business than the other one does. Allegiance to the dead founder, in other words, not doing anything that dad wouldn't have wanted to do. That's not what and dad's gone. And today is today, but they still bring him up saying that's what we should do because that's what he wanted. And triangulation, which is a problem anywhere, but it's where people will keep someone else out of the discussion who should be in it. And it's a insidious, and in a board of a few people, or even of many people, it can be harmful. So those are some of the things that are, I would say, they're not impossible to see in an ordinary corporate situation, but they are 90% of them show up in family controlled or owned corporations.
Yep.
Now, what tools do I use that I would not use as a ordinary mediator? Okay. The first is a genogram. Genogram is something I learning about family business advising. It's a graphic representation of the family relationships that I draw up as I'm meeting and talking to people, and I find out about the great-grandparents, the grandparents, and where they came from, what happened to them. And pretty soon you have a page full of connections, and there are lines between them, and who doesn't like who, you put that sort of with a jagged line and so on. And for me, it's really helpful. I don't have to look through 40 pages of notes. I have it in front of me in one sheet. I don't share it with the family. I wouldn't say I would never do it, but it's really a tool for me. And so that's something which there's no reason for me to find out about grandparents if I'm doing a commercial mediation. It's irrelevant, really, but this is relevant because often the grandparents started the business, and to know that is quite critical. I mentioned before, pre-session meetings with each party, very important. I recommend it to those people who I think could use it, that they read Difficult Conversations, a book by Stone, Patton, and Heen from Harvard. It's really a wonderful book, and it just deals with how to relate to each other in situations without a mediator normally. I mean, this is not made for mediation. It's meant to talk, because after I'm gone, they're still going to be talking to each other. In fact, I'm only there for an instant in time. They're there for their whole lives. So learning how to listen with curiosity, how not to attribute intention to acts of other people. As we all know, we never did anything bad, but the other ones they intended to do something wrong. And listening without that filter on it, where you're really trying to find out what happened and what happened without blaming them. Now the final issue I wanted to talk about was, how is a family business mediator different from a family business advisor? I see the roles as complementary. A family business advisor will structure and give advice to a family on how to do certain things, whether it's a tax thing or it's a structural thing within the company, or bylaws, or buy-sell agreements, things like this. But in my experience, without having a family business mediator involved, and not every family needs it, but where there's real disputes, the structures will be made for reasons other than the family. And I'm not saying that they mean to do that, but they don't know how to ask the questions or don't know what to do with it. I remember being in practice, and there would be wealthy families in the firm or represented by the firm, setting up very complicated trusts and tax saving things. Nobody ever asked, is this the best thing for the children? Is this what they want? And so the parent dies saving 30% on taxes, but he leaves this massive structure, which nobody quite understands. And that perpetuates longer than they do. And they have to go to third parties to get advice on doing things. I mean, it can be a nightmare. And I think there's a very good role for a family business advisor, but it's to do what the family wants and what's best for them, to build that structure, not what's necessarily saves the founder, who's dead anyway by then, the most taxes. So, I mean, they should know that. I'm not saying they shouldn't know that's a possibility, and maybe they would choose that. But I think it's likely they would choose ways that get their interests made. For instance, someone may have no interest in the business. Say, pay me out right away, buy me out. Let me go do it, go to Venice or Florence and be an artist. And fine, they would be a pain in the neck anyway at the meetings because they don't understand it. So that's great. And it allows them to continue to have a social relationship with each other, meeting together for family dinners and family get-togethers without the tension of somebody who's not really interested in the business or doesn't feel like getting enough money out of the business. And the final difference is, which is related to all this, and the parties themselves, and this is what we mediators do, we let the parties come up with the best solution for them, not what we think is the best solution. I can't tell you the number of times I'll walk into a mediation and I have to keep out of my head the way I should solve it, because I know how I would solve it, but you have to bite your tongue and let them come up with it. Maybe they'll come up with the same thing you did, and you can always ask questions which might lead them to think about what you did. But as soon as you're on the other side of the debate as to whether you should do this, you've lost your neutrality. And I think then you lose your effectiveness completely. So allowing them to come up with a solution, and that's the one they will live with the best. So that's what I wanted to say. It's just really a really quick overview, but thank you for allowing me to present this.
No, you've brought up very interesting points. So thank you very much. I am going to take you through some of them. The last one, you use the word neutrality. And of course, you know that, of course, with Bernie May, we were talking about neutrality. So I think that part of it, I think we need to explore a little bit, because that on one end, the trust part of it, to keep that trust, but the other side, are you going to be neutral? Should you be neutral? I think you want to pick that up a little bit.
Tell me what you mean by neutral.
That's what I'm saying. What do we mean by neutral? That's the whole thing. Are you going to be neutral? Because
no, I think the question is, you have to reverse it. What would it mean to be not neutral? And
look, I think finally, basically it comes on one end what Bernie obviously talks about, the power imbalances, because definitely in families those power imbalances are there. Now, are you going to be looking at those and looking at solutions, considering those, or are you going to let them go where they have to, although you can see issues there? I don't know. Those are the kind of questions which will come up, not just in family businesses, otherwise also, but in family businesses it might be a little more important, maybe, because I don't know how you look at that.
Well, there's a wonderful tool which we all have called reality testing. And we could say, that's a really good idea. But let me get it straight. Did you think about this? And you let them put it together. Now, it may be that they're better than you are. Look, I don't have a successful business like they do. So I'm not really saying that I'm the expert. But I would, if I know something is headed for disaster, if they choose it, I will get them to see it's headed for, hopefully, rather than saying, that's headed for disaster. I would say, well, and now is that neutral? Now, neutral, you could just have a computer.
Exactly. That's the whole idea. That's the basic point, that if you can just program with all the machine learning and artificial intelligence today, if you can just do that, then maybe you'll find that very neutral situation. No, but looking at it from the perspective of the relationship, because these are relationships there. Are you going to touch the human cord there, or are you going to be more, I mean, how do you look at your role normally?
I don't know how to separate the humanness from these issues, because I don't even know how to answer the question, because everything I do is in interest of helping them and helping them on a human level. Sometimes you can't help them because either the legal position is so weak that you can help them save time and money in getting out of it. I mean, not necessarily in families, but I think that it's hard to distinguish what I do from, as I said, there's a context involved. The context is the legal context or the family context. And that's what I work with. I work with what's there and try to, as they say, what doctors say, do as least harm as possible in order to help them do it. And
Because,
I don't know.
yeah, no, Richard, because what I'm looking at is on the other end, you had these lawyers. Obviously, for me, in that kind of situation, maybe the lawyers should have a different approach, but maybe they don't, because obviously they're looking at the commercial part of it, and that relationship aspect and those things might not be something that they would be looking at, and you would bring that part in. But with that kind of an atmosphere, because if the way I look at it, maybe in the US, the control of the mediation process, a lot of it, I see the lawyers controlling a lot of aspects of that. I may be totally wrong. You can obviously correct me. But in that kind of an atmosphere, when you have that approach happening on one end and you bring a different approach, how does that work? The dynamics of that?
Well, I don't think I bring a different approach to the legal side. What I bring is a different approach to an area that they don't even look at. That,
Yeah.
in other words, the hunt for interests, going back to getting to yes, the hunt for interests is something which lawyers are not trained to do. They're looking for rights and agreements and sentences and clauses, but the interests. I did a mediation once between a landlord and a tenant, and there's a commercial tenant, and the commercial tenant had taken much too much space. He couldn't afford the rent of that space, and yet so he hadn't paid his rent for a while, and his lawyer had come up with all these excuses. The signage was not what it was supposed to be. The heating was lower than it should be. He had all these things. And so it was going on and on. I met with the landlord, I met with the tenant separately first. And the tenant said, I just need to find a smaller space. The landlord had plenty of spaces that were smaller. If he could get this tenant out by the end of the month, he could put in a much better term. That's the kind of thing I brought to it. It wasn't against the lawyer's arguments. It was expanding it to say there's another world out there where these two business people can make a deal, and then the lawsuit becomes irrelevant. So I think sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes there is nothing else out there, but at least there can be an exploration of interests. So I can help the lawyers resolve it. If they really want to resolve it, I can help them.
No, because like you said about those example of those sisters, that situation where the lawyers are in control totally and they're not letting that communication happen also, and suddenly you're in a room where you're trying to obviously break that, but how much does that happen? What are that's what I said. I mean, the dynamics of maybe individual situations or whatever, if you've seen that, and how did you break that?
It's sometimes hard because I come into it too late. They've been in litigation for a year and they've built up resentments. The lawyers build a lot of money. And when you're dealing with a company or a state who's paying the bill, they don't feel the burn that much. It's other people's money, because if you're in an estate and you only have a third or a fourth or a fifth of it, the lawyer, that means your legal bill is only a fourth or a fifth of what it otherwise would be. It still could be a lot of money, but not nearly as much. So I think it's really hard to, in some cases, to get into that relationship after they've been built up by the lawyers for so long into being hostile. And the problem is in courts, there is often no clear answer. They're still throwing the dice as to what the judge is going to say. Not that the judge is going to throw the dice, but there's hundreds of reasons why they could decide one way or another way. And so you want them to understand that let me go back and say something else. Sometimes people want a judge to tell them, even if they're tells them they're wrong.
Yeah.
I can't really do anything with that because I can't tell them they're wrong or they're right. But if that's the way they feel, they say, look, I'll accept it if the judge says so. That's a kind of a feeling which I respect if they want to do that. But to me, it's not rational because you're taking a chance, and it could be, it's never more than a 70% chance of winning. There's always a chance of something going wrong. So they're willing to bet on that. And it's not that they're betting they'll win. They just want a authoritative figure to listen to them and to give them an answer. And of course, that's what they say now. But maybe after they get the answer, they wouldn't want it.
No, but I think it's important. I think maybe to play a more active role as a mediator, maybe there is that whole, maybe there is that, I mean, there is a certain box for mediators and mediation that has been created. Maybe you have to get out of that. I mean, after I do get out of that. For me, it's different, but I know a lot of people feel their hands are tied. So I think in these kind of situations, maybe there is a little more that has to be put in. So,
Well, what I do often, if I see something, I will say, would you like me to make a mediator's proposal? Which I only do at the end because I see it's not settling. And then they have something to compare to. They say, okay, I think it's rarely 50% in the middle because that doesn't normally make sense. But it's a number. And they'd say, you mean if I paid that number now, it would be over? Yes, if you go on, you could pay 100%, you know. So that sometimes works because they see through my, not that I'm an expert on all the cases, I'm not, but I'm an expert on probabilities of what's going on. And just without even knowing the details of the case, you know, that kind of case always has some factual elements that are wild cards. So I think in that case it would work. And again, if they say they want a judge to tell them, then maybe they can hire a judge. Maybe that's the best way. I'll say, look, why don't you just hire a judge, a retired judge, let them give you the answer. Save all the time.
But I think interesting thing that, I mean, of course, whether how much that will happen, but I think like a family GP, there should be a family mediator in these businesses available, because I think the early the intervention, I think easier it might be. So I think how that will work, because I'm just saying, I've been saying that not just for, of course, this family business is one thing, but for projects, there should be someone right there throughout the project, because a lot of things obviously can be sorted out quite early. And there are sometimes very basic things which are like relationship issues which create that. So going a little deeper sometimes fast can do that. Because what you said about the mother having a role there, we have this now. It's of course the largest market capitalized company in India. The brothers had an issue after their father passed away, and the mother played a very important role in that, to be able to get that whole thing settled. Obviously, the one brother now is, I think, the 10th richest man in the world. The other one didn't do too well there, so he had a lot of issues after they broke up the business. So.
Well, he's probably only the 20th richest man in the world. So
No. He's not. He went way down. He went way down. Yeah. So that didn't.
yeah,
Why? What the reasons for that? I mean, I won't get into that. But
no.
but at least the mother played an important role there. So that's why I think the other people there, obviously mother also. I mean, I think of course she had a shareholding, but still the important part of getting the brothers together and get that sorted out was important, I think.
Yeah, culture is very important. And I remember doing a mediation involving one Arab party, and they wouldn't move. I mean, they just would. And then I read a book called The Arab Mind, and it was about how people feel loss of face so badly that they really can't give it up. And the only way, one way, was to say, what would a honored uncle or father do? They can then somehow transpose it into that. And so I didn't know the family well enough to do it, but I suggested it to the lawyers. that they use that as an example and say, what would your father want you to do? In other words, some third party, and then they will, of course, it's even better if he's alive and he says you should do it. But if he isn't invoking that principle, that there's somebody who would not like you to screw your brother badly and so on, that can help.
But I think that's the space that has come up for what we were, okay, let's call them professional mediators, but an outside person coming in, that space has come in because those people are missing in the family now. And I think the respect for them, of course, that aspect has also changed. So I think that's why the third person coming in has become something which is, of course, going to take happen in other parts of the world where things are changing, societies are changing. So I think that's where the role of professional mediators is coming in. Otherwise, I don't think they were required. They should not have been required. Your family should have had those people within to take care of that.
Well, remember, in those societies, the family takes care of each other. And so for the senior elder to say, give in to your brother, he's even the one who gives in will still be taken care of. In other words, it's part, they look at the unit as the family, not the individual. So disputes within the families have to be resolved. Very interesting.
Yeah. But Richard, you'll have to tell us, give us some experience where by digging a little deeper, you found the issue to be so simple that it got resolved like that.
Give me a minute here. I think in every case, part of what we're doing is calming them down. And if something is bothering them, and like the bullying or something like that, I'm trying to think of a case that I could recite like that, where the other party doesn't even know how hurt one was. And all he has to do, I've seen apologies saying, oh, I'm so sorry you felt that way. I remember one case, wasn't a family case. It was a case involving the contractor and a company that hired the contractor. And they were in two different rooms. And that's the way they wanted to do it. And the one who was claiming payment, the other ones were saying he did a lousy job, we don't want to pay him, and so on. I told the one party who was seeking payment that, which was true, they said they really respected his workmanship. They thought he was the best of what he did in the county or the area. And I told him that. Immediately he softened because he thought they hated him and they didn't think he was worth anything. As soon as I told them that they felt that he was a good worker, they didn't tell them in order for me to tell them that. I'm not sure that I would have asked them if they would have said yes. I probably exceeded my role a little bit, but I said, they really think you're good at what you do. He then had that respect, which he did not think he had. And it allowed him then to say, okay, let's settle this now. But that was a case where I found something almost inadvertently without looking for it, where they told me that, and then I used it. I wish I had a little notebook of all the times when things, but they're often smaller things too. They're not always drug problems or problems about recognition. No, I'm sorry, I can't really think of a really good example other than that one I gave you, which clarified the feeling underneath about people.
But tell me now, bringing you in. Now, who's bringing you in normally into the mediation?
That's a very good question. I get it sometimes from the courts, who I'm on a panel for the probate courts in New York, and I'm chair of that. I was chair, now they've moved into the state system. But the court will recommend and then I will be on that list. And in that case, the lawyers are almost kicking and screaming. They don't want to go. The clients don't know. And so they say, this is never going to work, and sometimes it works very well. And they just didn't think it would. But I also get them, I rarely get them from a lawyer representing a family company who's having a problem, even though that should be the best market, because he can't, once the issues become identified, one against the other, he can't really represent both. He's got to choose. Now, if he brought a mediator in, I could nip that in the bud, because I could talk to both parties right away. And he has an ethical issue. If he starts talking to the children, saying, well, your father wants this, he immediately has violated his ethical principles. Those are my ethical principles. Exactly what he can't do, I can do. So that would, but I get it from the owners themselves sometimes, particularly through the Family Firm Institute. They've heard about me and they know there's a problem, so they would do it. They would call me in for a consult. But even those, I'd say only about 1 in 5 end up with real mediation. Usually I get calls from one of the family members saying, oh, I heard about what you do, and we really have this problem, and I think you're really helpful. I said, sure, let me write you up what I'll do, and you can send out the email to your other shareholders. That's the last I hear of it. I sometimes will call a couple of weeks later, and they'll say, well, they said they didn't want to do it or whatever. So there'll be one enthusiastic person, but to get the whole group on board is really difficult.
Yeah, well, no, that's the biggest challenge. I mean, that's why I'm asking you, because this is the most important part in actually, if you have to promote mediation, to be able to create that, either it's the awareness or I don't know where it's missing, but this happens most of the time because there is one person who wants to reach out. And of course, building that trust with that one individual for all of them, that of course is obviously another challenge. So how does that work? How you've seen that work? How can we?
Well, it works best, unfortunately, when they get to the point of threatening or about to go to litigation. Then everyone takes it seriously. I was doing it was a AAA mediation I got assigned years ago. It was for a very big U.S. company, was on one side, and a regional dealer was on the other. And I talked to the general counsel of the big company. I said, he's got some very good arguments here. And it's silly to go through the whole arbitration when we could talk about them. He said, no, I guess they hadn't actually brought the arbitration. They went to mediation first. They hadn't started. Well, and he said, look, I will get no authority for doing anything until we're sued. He said, until we get that. He said, they will I won't get it. He said, I have to be sued first. Now, that put me in an ethical dilemma because I didn't tell the other side, sue them, because he told me that sort of confidence. And yet I wanted to, because I knew that the mediation would work if they sued them. So in some ways, this is the case here too. And that if people feel the hot breath of money that's going to have to be spent, they may say, let's try that first, because it's a better way. Now, more and more people are getting divorced these days using mediation. So I think that's kind of our best advertising that it works. I think if that were the case, nobody would even know about it. I mean, the lawyers would, but not many other people would.
No, but the last session with Liz was the holistic approach to divorce mediation. So now maybe we also have to look at holistic approach to family business disputes, mediation. Right. I think maybe there is much more that maybe the people should also understand. Lots that can go into that, and bringing in a lot more people into that. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, we can create something. Yeah.
I like the idea. Something you said before I wanted to come back to was that the mediator should be like on call whenever they have a dispute.
Yeah. Family mediator kind.
I see the good side for me and the downside for them, because they will not learn to deal with it themselves. Part of my job is to help them learn the tools to deal with those issues.
Yeah, not only Richard. The reason is because the family relationship, those emotions are brought into the business, and because of that, I think things you need someone. If one is a totally purely a business kind of relationship, things can be handled very differently. But
Right.
other dynamics of whatever is happening outside the business gets brought in. So for that reason, like I said, look, the person was not required only because those people are missing now in the chain, which should have been there in the family, available to them all the time. So that, look, they might be still be available there, but the respect has gone. The respect is concept of respect has changed in society. So that is where a third person, a professional, I think that's why.
I think you got a very good idea there. I was always thinking, there was a friend of mine in Paris. I mediate very often or I judge the mediations of the ICC in Paris. And the a friend of mine there has set up something called SOS mediation. In other words, quick, we'll get there within an hour, we'll help you out. And I thought, wow, that's a great idea, or so I would like that to be the case where people could say, we're having a problem, let's call someone in. Unfortunately, the way it works is that I was leaving on a trip a couple of years ago, and I got this very good mediation. Lawyers called me to do it. I said, well, I'll be gone for 2 weeks. They said, oh, we want it resolved by then. And I'm thinking, yeah, we have to call someone else. They will never even get a meeting in 2 weeks. I mean, theoretically, maybe you could, but it certainly won't get it resolved in 2 weeks. So I could have been back and done it anyway, but they wanted to get started.
No, actually, the important thing is that creating that trust, that itself can take so long. And after you've done that, that part of it can then stay for the entire duration of either the mediator's life or that business, one of them.
Well, I was thinking, how we have this American Automobile Association in the country, which happens to be the same initials of the American Arbitration Association. But if you have a breakdown on the road, you call them, and within 30 minutes, they're there, they fix the flat, they put the battery, whatever it is, take care of it. We trust them because we know the people they use are good. That's the kind of, because otherwise people, I'd say only 1 in 10 companies are ever going to need a real family mediation. So why should 10 of them have a mediator on call? But if they had the mediator emergency service on call, then they would have somebody.
I tell you, Richard, because you're underestimating yourself. It's you that they want. They will not do with anyone else. That's what I'm trying to tell you. This is where the important part lies. It's not that machine that you can bring in, which is manufactured by that reliable source. It is the particular person that has to come in, because okay, I've been talking about it. I'm sure you won't get time to watch everything that I do, because I think there are now more than 320 videos out there. But there is one important element which I do keep talking about, is the heart, soul, spirituality part. What that person brings in and that energy that that person brings in is so unique. And that, according to me, is a very important part, which doesn't get discussed in relation to mediation and the way people are made mediators in 40-hour factories. Those issues don't ever come up there. You don't make that aspect. What you bring in is what you bring in because of a lot of other factors. So that's why it's you. And that once that connection is made, that connection should stay available to them all the time. It's like the father figure. It's like the father figure there, available to the organization and the people. It's both.
I don't discount what you're saying, but when you go to court, you don't know what judge you're going to get. And yet the black robe and the high position automatically gives that. So we should have some more kind of costumes and things of mediators. I'm half serious. I was thinking maybe something we wear around our neck, like a colored ribbon, that in a group, like if you have a mediation of 20 people, immediately you can spot the mediator because he's wearing the ribbon.
No, I tell you, you've touched another thing which I keep talking about is that whole colonization mindset that has gone throughout the world, that this is where dispute resolution happens in courts. And of course, lawyers are involved in it. Of course,
Yeah.
judges do it. And that's the concept of dispute resolution in general. So we have to, of course, change that whole concept. And that conditioning has happened over hundreds of years. So
Yeah.
that is where I think the root of the issue for me is, that is where we have to hit, because that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed at all. Today in the US also, mediation is connected with the courts, and how it'll go there, and the lawyers will control it, and they'll find in the court system there'll be a mediator who will be appointed, and the lawyers will make their money, but the mediator will get nothing, and then the mediator will get disillusioned. New lot will come in. I'm putting it very fast to you because I keep
No,
ranting about it. So ranting is the
no,
word I'm
I
using.
get what you're saying, but look at small claims courts. Small claims courts is exactly what you want. They're cheap. Lawyers are not allowed. There's mediation in most of them for at least half an hour before. So what you want is to have that in every case before they go even to the lawyer.
Yeah.
My issue is often that people who have very low claims, less than $10,000, they can go to small claims court. It's the people who have claims between 10,000 and 300,000 that have nobody to go to, because lawyers will take all their money if they go.
No, but the small claims court, the problem that's coming up is that the mediation by itself is in some way getting, I don't know, demeaned or I mean devalued, because the judge tells the person, go into that room, come back in half an hour, tell me what you've done. That kind of thing. So that concept of mediation, for the understanding of mediation for those people, becomes totally different. And it then goes out when they look, finally it's going to be word of mouth. And everyone is talking about mediation differently. One is, of course, the user is talking about it differently because of their experiences. Court system hasn't given the best of experience to most people. On the other end, the type of mediation, like this hand tied mediation, which we what that facilitative concept, I won't go beyond that kind of thing, that has also kind of affected the way mediation goes around. So a lot of factors are going into that, and that I'll definitely, whenever, maybe today or some other time, you can give us some things, because this is Mediation Vision 2026. So you have to tell us a little bit about how you look at things changing and how we are getting there. If you have time right now, we can do it later, whenever.
I'll tell you, one of the big problems we have, I mean, as a profession, is that we have all these judges retiring who suddenly put up a sign, they're mediators. Now, some of them are fine, but I heard a interview last week with somebody who's a new mediator at JAMS, I think. He was a judge before. He's been there a year. He's a mediator and I guess arbitrator too. He just mediates. He says, well, I've taken a course in mediation. It's really interesting. Now, he's been doing mediation like 6 months and taken like a 30-hour course in it. But because he's judge so-and-so, he's got an automatic following. The lawyers know him, they like him, and so on. So that's the problem, is that I mean, I can't do anything about it really. It's part of the environment. But I think before this big wave of retirements came in, there were fewer qualified mediators. And now I mean, if I were a layman, I would say, of course, I'd like a judge to do it. Wouldn't they be the smartest person to do it? So I understand that.
Yeah,
But
because I tell you, the problem is that people are confusing mediation with arbitration. That's why maybe their understanding is that judges can do it better, because actually they want to be told what to do, which is another discussion that I've had. And I mean, this was quite some time back. People from all over the world asking them about this, and the same thing. People were confusing mediation with arbitration, and if that is the case, then that is, of course, the kind of person that you're looking for. So
but they
that
don't care. They don't care. They don't care how we do it. They just want to win. So if they go to mediation, they think I am going to beat on the other side to tell them. I mean, this is before we start. They're going to get their claim in mediation, and of course that's not what we do. But I'm not sure they would come at all if they thought that, oh, you have to work on it. You got to work on the other side. You got to find your interests. I said, what? He owes me money. I don't want to do all those things.
Exactly. No, but this judge aspect that you were talking about is something that you've taken in your stride. But here, what has happened is this is just recently this activity is happening now, because obviously judges were looking at getting arbitrations, but now they suddenly looked at, oh, mediation is also an area we can get into. So there's this very senior mediator in India who just put out an article, and he's really criticized this. What has happened is some Supreme Court judges, serving judges, have set up a arbitration center where they're going to be doing mediations, got land from the government, and told the government authorities, you must send matters for mediation to that center. So he's really criticized that. And someone else has gone a step ahead and spoken about corruption, that this is corruption. And then
Yeah.
obviously, because you want this from the government, what are you doing as a judge when you're sitting there? So all those aspects are coming up, and these people are talking about it. And I think they should talk about it, because this is something which is going to, in whatever way, is going to affect mediation in the long run. In a country like ours, where nothing much is happening outside the court system. And like I was saying, that there are only a handful of people like me who are doing it outside the court system and only doing mediation as a mediator. It's a very rare situation happening.
I remember I was at an ABA dispute resolution section. There was an Indian mediator there. It wasn't you, it was someone else. And I've done so many years, I've forgotten his name. But he said that it was possible for the client, what was it? The client would choose the mediator, not the lawyer, in his practice. And that it would be more likely that he would keep the mediator and fire the lawyer if things weren't good. And I thought that is a really different relationship if the client chooses the mediator.
Yeah, I'm telling you that, and I don't want us to go the US way, where the lawyers control mediation, because finally hasn't been good for mediation in the US also. I don't still see that the change that I would want there. So I don't think that's the right step, but it is starting here now. It's starting here, that whole concept, because finally the mediator suffers, first of all, and mediation for me doesn't develop in the way it should develop. That being something which is a choice by people as we go along, it doesn't seem to be that. So those are issues there. But I won't, of course, I should have asked you first about your trip to your cruise, which we did not get into that. But thank you very much for doing it while you're just on your way there. I mean, sitting in.
Tell me this. Tell me about the teapot to the right, your right shoulder, and
look, my wife is a potter. She makes them. So this is the way I have my wife behind me all the time.
Okay, well, she does a wonderful job. I really like it. It's a lovely style. So
I try and keep changing it. I mean, this has been here for a few days now, but I do keep putting her. She got so much stuff lying there, so why not put it up here sometimes?
No, it's one of the things about Zoom is that you get to know, you can't see anything. I'm in a hotel room, right? But I mean, normally you'd see books, you'd see what I'm reading, you'd see my dirty coffee cup, a lot of things around me. And that's very useful for me in mediation, to see the person, how they live, and hear the noises in the background, hear the child crying, all these, to me, it's a boon rather than having them all sit in a sterile conference room.
No, I think Zoom is, I think, the best thing that has happened for us in relation to mediation, because that's the way it should have been. You're sitting in your comfort zone. And you don't have to now stretch it for that, like you said, for that whole day, because you've traveled so much and you have to do it. I've had short meetings. I mean, very short meetings. Like some things have to be discussed for 10 minutes. Why do I have to call someone all the way there and then book an hour or two and all that? For me also is not good, because you finally want to reach that. If that's a settlement has to happen, you have to reach there. You don't have to be putting all your time into it. There's so much more to do. Talking to Richard is important, isn't it? So those are the things which sometimes you get missed out because of booking yourself for so much time, and that wasn't really required. So I think this is ideal, and I've got totally online. No concept of that physical thing at all.
Well, this would not be possible without Zoom, would it? Yeah. I mean, this is what we're doing right now. So
exactly, just the fact that you're traveling, and in the middle of your travel, you're sitting and you're being able to do this. Yeah, oh, ideal. Of course, we would have loved to do it on the cruise. That would have been another interesting thing.
Well, it might have worked, but they said they have Wi-Fi, but I didn't trust it, and I didn't want to say it would work.
Well, I'm
So,
sure they would have had good speed also. I'm sure that's there. I mean, that's where everything happens. Everything is on the internet now. Everyone wants to be connected. So I'm sure they would do a good job there.
yeah.
So
Well,
Richard,
I couldn't guarantee it, so I wouldn't. That's why I wouldn't choose the first date. But anyway, thank you for suggesting I come and or
no,
agreeing to it.
no,
Yeah. Well, this
thank
has
you very
been.
much. Yeah, it's been really nice talking to you. And of course, these conversations will continue.
Thank you. And I will tune in more now and check on who's spoken because I've only seen a handful, but I saw the one where you had your colleagues from India talking about that judge new thing was, and I was so fascinated by that. So I had heard about it before from you and your colleagues, and
Because Mr. Panchu was in that session. He's the one
yeah.
he's the person who started the first mediation center in the courts in India. And I keep telling him that, of course, this whole thing of free that has happened with mediation in the court system, that's been the worst thing. So I take credit for it. It may not be me, but I say, because I've been talking to him for so long, today's view has changed. He says only the people who can't afford it should get it pro bono. They should get mediators in the court system. Otherwise, it should totally go out. Market should decide. So at least he's been talking about it now. It's been 17 years since that center started. Things I feel would have been a lot different, but doesn't matter. Whatever's happened has happened. We can start afresh now.
Well, you're doing wonderful work. You're doing great work with this, and I think you will have an effect.
Thank you very much. And I'll see you soon whenever, we'll have some session. All right. See you. Thank you, Richard, for being there.
And anyway, you say I can drop in on other sessions.
Any
right?
of the, same Zoom link, just drop in. Please drop in. It'll be nice.
Okay,
Yep.
bye.
All right. Bye.